So talking about .NET, from the time when I started .NET, where that was just on Windows and ASP.NET and Windows Forms and other things, but today it's all about doing many workloads with .NET. So if you're a .NET developer today, you can take your existing skills and build on multiple platforms, starting from web, cloud, mobile, gaming, like gaming for Xbox, gaming for PlayStations, or maybe you're doing IoTs, or maybe you're starting with AI and ML. So we have everything ready for you. So that's why I say, being a .NET developer, I know I spoke to some of you right now when we started it. You have 9 years, 10 years of experience with .NET, but today being a .NET developer, it's even more exciting because you can take any workload and start building apps. So the beauty of this is, if you know one particular thing, let's say if you are an ASP.NET developer, it won't be hard for you to understand how mobile works. All that you need to learn is the SDKs. The rest of the thing, the paradigm, the tool set, everything is going to be same. So that's what it's amazing. And the most important thing about .NET today is it's free and it's also open source. That is really cool because you know exactly what is the next .NET version because it's all built in the open. You can communicate with the team. You can contribute to some of these things. So everything is happening in the open, and that is very exciting. So talking about the ecosystem, well, you probably know Stack Overflow. So one of their insights says it's one of the most loved framework out there. I mean, when we started .NET Core, when we moved from .NET Framework to .NET Core, our idea was to make it high performant and make it cross-platform. And that's something which has gone really well, and people love it. We have now 1.5 million developers, active developers, which we measured in Visual Studio, and C# being one of the top 5 languages on GitHub. And also, when I talked about performance, you can see that it's 7 times faster than Node.js, and it's also faster than Java, right? So if you're starting with a .NET web application, I would suggest, or I would recommend you to start with ASP.NET because there is tech-empowered benchmarks, and these are third-party benchmarks out there. They'll figure this out for you. So it is really high performant. And I've also spoken to customers who actually moved from Node.js to ASP.NET. And because Node.js runs on Linux and ASP.NET now runs on Linux too, they were able to make use of the existing infrastructure. So they didn't have to change the infrastructure. They were able to just port everything to ASP.NET and take advantage of the performance too. So talking about other options, well, we have 1 million plus monthly active users, which was, which we kind of figured out from the last year, and that's huge. And also when it comes to .NET Core, there is 600K new active developers, and these are active developers. What does active developers mean? They are not developers who just go and download the applications, download the SDKs, but they are the people who work every day in Visual Studio on the same workloads, right? So the other thing which is most exciting for me is .NET now works on Linux too. So we have seen more than 1 million publishing from Visual Studio to Linux, and it will be even more. We don't have telemetry on how people publish using DevOps, right? So probably it's even more. But from Visual Studio itself, there's about 1 million people, more than 1 million people publishing to Linux. So if you are into .NET, and if you haven't tried the .NET Core 3, you should, because it's the fastest adopted version and it is high performant. So that's the site .NET/get-core3. You should go check that out. One of our customers have done that already, which is Stack Overflow. I mean, if you are a developer, you probably are using this every single day. I'm hoping so. So they have ported. I mean, you probably know that Stack Overflow runs on .NET, and they actually migrated to .NET Core 3.1 specifically because they see high performance. Well, they want to make things faster for developers, right? .NET Core. Let's talk about what's new in .NET Core. Now, we actually announced Blazor. I think it was in November during .NET Conf, right? So we had Blazor server then, and we recently during Build we announced the Blazor WebAssembly, which is the new Blazor, which runs new .NET that runs on in your browser, and that is also exciting. So Blazor is all about, full stack development using .NET. So you don't have to write JavaScript. So we've seen developers trying to build .NET applications, web applications, and then when it comes to building client side, they rely on JavaScript heavily, and they have to just juggle between the frameworks out there, trying to figure out which one was whether Angular versus React, and then get into those discussions things. So we thought how could we make this better for .NET developers? How can we take .NET to work directly on browsers too? So that's the approach that we took, and we announced Blazor Server, which is pretty clean, where everything happens, even the UI happens on the workload is happening on the server, and it is actually pushed to the client. And the way they connect between is basically using the HTTP WebSocket. So it's all streamed and it just updates. So that is something which is already done. If you are from the ASP.NET Web Forms world, you probably will find very similarity how the Blazor server had taken that approach. So you will just everything right on .NET, and then you have, I mean, in the web form state, there used to be a run net equals server, and then those things used to run there. Now it's almost seamless because you're all writing Razor pages, and those it's a UI component, so it automatically renders the UI HTMLs directly inside your browsers. So with this release, we also enable WebAssembly, which is basically running .NET inside browser, not just running on the server, but inside the browser itself. So we'll take a look at that in a bit. Okay, let's take a look at that now. So this is my desktop, and let's open Visual Studio. I'll start a new project. So if you want to start a new project, you know how to do it. So this is Visual Studio 2019. So you choose Blazor app. So this is where it gets interesting. So click next. I'm just going to use whatever default that comes there. Okay, here it is. So there's Blazor server app, and then there's Blazor WebAssembly app. So in Blazor WebAssembly app, let's choose a few things. So there is this ASP.NET Core hosted. So WebAssembly app can completely run on browser. It doesn't require a server. But if you are looking for a server that has to host these pages, like for example, it has to push the pages for the first time into the browser, so you can enable that. And also progressive web application. So this is the new thing. You can actually install your web application as an application that runs on the desktop too, right? So if you want to enable those features, you can actually directly enable these. Are just simple checkboxes. And the one more thing that I'm going to do right now is basically change the authentication mechanism as well, so that I can show you one of the features that comes with it. And let's go create it. So when this completes, what's going to happen is it's going to create the client side, a server side project, and the shared project. So shared project is nothing but a simple library that we assume that you probably want to share it between the client and server, which could be something like models that you want to share. Like say when you're hitting the server for some data and you want to convert that data into model representation in classes, so you can share those things because you don't have to write twice in the projects. So, and the other thing is this is a client project. So this is pretty much what runs inside of your browser. And the server is basically, it's acting just as a web server, which is hosting this client. And for the first time when it connects it, it just pushes the client in. And from there on, if you want to connect to the server, you can have some controllers out there. Probably some of the things like, maybe you are working with authentication that you need to connect back to the server, or probably you are working with some ML models that you do not want to send it to the client. So those kind of things, you can actually partially keep it on the server, and everything else can run on the client too. Okay, so because I'm running, I enable the identity, and I'm actually, what I'll do is I'll enable the migrations of the EF. So let me just go take my package manager console, and I'm going to just do update database. This will set up the schema for me. So I don't have to do that. I can also do it when I just run the server, but I'm just trying to save a bit of time here by doing it much ahead of time. So this will set up all the identity related stuff that is needed for me to run this application. So I'll just wait for one more status here, which is called the done. And once that is done, yes, that's done now. So let's go and run this, right? So I did not do anything. I just created file new project, which is a WebAssembly project. And I just created the data. I just set the database is ready for me to run this. OK, so this is my WebAssembly project that is being started. So this is very simple project. You have this home counter, right? And then fetch data. So I'll just click on these things. So they see that's super fast. It's all running inside the browser. Now, to show that to you, I'm going to open the inspector tool and go to the network, and I'm going to do a restart. And you can watch that the entire .NET is basically pulled in. How do I say that? Because you see that there's .NET DLLs. They're all pulled into your browser, and it's all running inside of it, which is pretty amazing, right? Who would have ever imagined that we could run .NET right inside of the browser? Well, this is all possible using the open stuffs like the WebAssembly, which is all open specification. So this is all going to run wherever there is this specification that is supported, even in mobile platforms. Okay, so the next thing I want to do is, let's say I want to debug this application. There's multiple ways you can do that. So I'm going to use the browser tools again to debug this. So I'm going to use the Alt, Shift, and D. So now it says, okay, it can't find the debugger, so I need to attach this. So for that, it gives me the code that I need to do, execute in my command for the edge to attach it. So I'm going to open run command and put this code in there and click OK. So this is going to start my browser, and now it's in the debugging mode. So I can again start off with attaching this. So for comparison, what I'm going to do is I'm going to attach to the left and sorry, to the right, and oops, and to the left. So that way, there you go. So now you can see that these files that came up from the server, these are the client and shapes. You can see that there is all the code that is running inside of this is all here. There's no server here. That's because server is a hosted component. So sorry, it's a hosted platform, so it doesn't have to be delivered here. So this is only the client-side pages. Now, if I want to debug this, I can go into one of these C# classes. I can hit on the breakpoint here, and if I just say click me, and you can see that it's already hit. So that's 0. I can go and inspect these things. But let's continue this. Let's hit it once again to show you that this is all working. Where's this? There you go. Let's hit it again. There you go. So it's all updated. So if you are using the Chrome developer tools, you can do that too. Or you can actually make use of Visual Studio to do this for you. So for that, I'm just going to close this. I can go back to my Visual Studio right here and go to my client-side application, into the pages, counter.razor, and I can put a breakpoint here, go back to my browser, and hit on click. Watch this. There you go. So we have hit it directly over here, right? So now I can go and make use of Visual Studio's debugging tools to help me succeed over here. The other thing about Visual Studio debugging tools is like you can also attach and debug server-side components as well. So for example, this fetch data is going to hit on the server. So since if you can see that, it's asking me to log in, but everyone who wants to see the weather has to be logged in, which is an interesting feature, right? So how that handling happened is basically, if you go into the fetch data.razor, this is a client-side component. So let me just move this a little bit to explain you this. So there's an attribute that you can put as authorized. So any component that needs authorization, so if you need to make sure there's a session key, you need to make sure you enable this authorized feature, and it will automatically detect that this page is not, even though it's client-side, it will not be shown to the user until this is authenticated. And that's the reason why it was automatically forwarded to the authorization page or authentication page. So let's log in here. So this is a new project. I haven't created any user here, so I'm going to just go and create this, right? So create my email ID here and password. There you go. I'll just register. Ask me to confirm this account. Yes, I'll just go and confirm. And I'll go back to my login here, put in my password. Okay. And now you can see that it is, once it's successfully authenticated, it is able to go and connect back to the server. So if I want to debug this, you know what I need to do, right? I can just go to the Visual Studio, put in, so this is the server page, so I can go to the server project and go to the controller. This is the controller that's getting hit. So if I want to debug this at the same time as I debug these client side, all that I need to do is just make sure I put a breakpoint here. Cool. So that's with WebAssembly, and let's quickly get back to the presentation. I'm trying to find all the cancellations that is supposed to be here because of my larger screen. I'm not able to find that. Okay. So that's about WebAssembly. Now let's look at what are the other things that was released in .NET Core 3.1. That's Windows Forms Designer. which is you would be wondering why Windows Forms Designer is a new release. I mean, if you've been working with .NET Framework for a very long time, and Windows Forms Designer has been there for a very long time and successfully used by many people. Last year, around November, we actually brought in the desktop support to .NET Core. That means you don't need framework, but you can directly build desktop applications in .NET Core. And we brought in both WPF and Windows Forms support. Now we have the designer support also enabled. So that means you can create a new Windows Forms project in .NET Core and make use of the designer. So we hadn't had the designer support until now, but now it's available. And the third-party control support, that's something which we are working on it, and it'll be out soon. The other thing that we released is ML.NET and the model builder, which is very exciting. So if you are a .NET developer and you will be wondering, how do you do machine learning? How do you get started with machine learning? We have this feature baked in directly inside Visual Studio. So if you go to, just like we had this project that I created, Blazor, if I want to add an ML feature into that, all that I need to do is right-click on the project file and add machine learning to the project, and then it will pop up the screen for you, which asks you, okay, choose the scenario. What is your scenario for building machine learning? Sometimes maybe you're building a web application to analyze the sentiment of some comments that is coming to your site, right? So you can choose the sentiment analysis and provide the respective data and train those things directly in Visual Studio locally if your system is really good. Or we also have an option called Azure AutoML, which is basically, once you choose that AutoML option, it basically spins up the VMs in the cloud, and it goes and trains your model and then spins down the VM. So you only pay for that particular thing, time that you're using to train this model. So that is all integrated inside it. So just to save time, I'm not showing you those demos yet, but if you're interested and if you want to talk more about it, I can take those things during the Q&A session. Okay, so we are now in .NET Core 3.1. Specifically, we're calling it 3.1 because that's the long-term support. So every year we kind of announce the new .NET Core, and the LTS versions actually has support for 3 years. So if you are looking for a very stable product and where you want large number of support, for long years of support, then you should actually always stick to the LTS version. But if you are in the microservices world where you want the exciting new stuffs all the time and you're ready to take the risks, you probably can start with a preview, but then eventually you can go for the current releases too. Like you can the next release, which is the .NET 5, is going to be the release that will be generally there for the 1 year, and then the LTS versions are generally there for the 3 years. So we announced a few things like side-by-side support and self-contained EXEs. That's something which I'll show you today, and also the Blazor thing that we talked about already. And there's some great features on C# 8 as well. Now, talking about the partners, well, if you're used to these partners like Infogistix, Syncfusion, DevExpress, and other things, they have great controls for .NET Core already. So if you have experience working with these controls in the past, you should be able to get those kind of controls from these vendors already for the .NET Core too. So now let's talk about journey to one.NET. Now, we had this long vision of making .NET, unified. So now, right now, if you're starting with .NET, you probably will have heard these versions. Like there's .NET Framework, then there is .NET Core, then there is Mono and Xamarin, right? So Xamarin runs on Mono. So there has been different flavors of .NET, and we have been having this vision to unify this. So making it a single .NET and avoid all the confusions. And that's what we are aiming for with the .NET 5 and the .NET 6 wave. So most of this integration will get completed in .NET 6. But our vision is to have the single SDK, one VCL, and unified toolchain. So you start with a file new .NET project and choose the workload that you want to work on instead of choosing between .NET Framework and .NET Core or Mono and Xamarin and things. Again, the other thing that we are working on is a cross-platform native UI. So .NET Xamarin has been actually having this new version called the .NET MAUI, and we will talk about that a little bit in that. So that's with that vision to make sure we don't really confuse people with too many names, but instead have a single vision for .NET. And the other thing that I want to talk about today is the cloud native investments that we are doing. So today we are talking about .NET for building in Linux and having for microservices workload with self-contained EXEs and other things. So we are working heavily on this. We're working on diagnostics. We're working on making the tool chain better for microservices development, and we are simplifying the EXEs that gets outputted from the .NET compilers. So those are the things that we are working on extreme. So some of the things about cloud native investments that I talked about, we want to make sure that .NET is cross-platform and we have great tooling support. So WSL, if you haven't tried, Windows Subsystem for Linux. So that's something which I'll show you today. Then smaller microservices, single EXE, I talked about all these things. And we are also introducing something called as Project TIE, which is what I will demo that today. And we're also investing on a high performance reverse proxy called Project ER. And this came in as a request from some of the teams internally at Microsoft who use .NET, Azure and other services which uses .NET heavily. They wanted a reverse proxy which was working within .NET instead of going for third-party reverse proxies and fiddling around with those configurations. So we are building this as well. So these are all in Project I and Project ER. They are on preview, so feel free to try them out and help us make that better. So let's look at these demos. So let's start with developing for Linux on Windows, and then we'll look at single file exe, and then at the end of it, we'll look at the Project TIE. So back to my desktop, and I'm going to start my terminal here. So if you haven't checked the Windows terminal out, you should definitely go and download this. This is pretty awesome. Gives you tabs, right? This is very great. So if I want to start off with Linux, Windows has this Windows subsystem for Linux, so I can actually run Ubuntu directly, and I'm not running any VMs, nothing, because under the hood, it's all taken care for you. OK, let's get started with developing applications here. So I'm going to see where am I. OK, that's fine. So I'll just do a .NET new. So if you are starting with .NET, I know most of you familiar with Visual Studio can do a file new project, but you can also do that in CLI. So you can just say .NET help, and you can see there are a number of options out there. So if you want to see what are the SDKs that I'm running right now, I can say list SDKs, and this is going to give me the SDKs that I'm running right now. So I have the preview 5.0 that's running, as well as 3.1. And this is the great feature of .NET Core, right? Previously with .NET Framework, the challenges that we had is like once you have one framework installed, it is very difficult to kind of target between multiples, and even on the web projects for that matter, right? So now you can just run side by side. It's all out there. So let's do a .NET new. So let me show you .NET new help as well. So when I go to the new project, so you get these templates. You can choose what you want to build from here. So if you are building on Blazor or Blazor Server, Blazor WASM, so if instead of using Visual Studio, you can directly use this option called Blazor WASM and get started too. So for now, for this demo, I'm trying to use, I'm going to use this web app project, which is a simple web app with a Razor implementation in it, right? So I'll just say .NET new web app. And I want to output this directly to, I'll call this as hello Linux. Okay, and one more thing I'm going to do is I want to specify the framework version because I'm running this .NET. I have this 5.2 and 3.1 installed. I just want to run this on Netcore app 3.1. That's the LTS version, so I want to stick to that. The reason for that is because I want to show this demo also in the Linux environment where I only have 3.1 and I don't have the 5.0 installed in that. So for that reason, I'm just making this simplified. So that will do the create new project there. And if we go to the Hello Linux project, so if I do a .NET build, or let me not do the .NET build, I'll just go into the Visual Studio Code environment to see this project. So this is a simple ASP.NET project. If I just run it, it's going to just go ahead and build this thing for me. OK, this is going to ask me. So VS Code is smart enough to ask you, like, hey, we have some things missing here. Do you want to add it? I'm going to say yes. So it will add necessary features for me in VS Code to get this running. So to show this demo working in Linux and Windows, I'm going to add a few things here. So this is my welcome page in my index.cshtml. All that I'm going to do is I'm going to put an environment.os version. So this will pull out the OS version that it's going to run on. And let me just run this. So if I just start this right now, while this is running. Okay, so that so this thing opened in another window. So oops, give me a second. Yeah, there you go. So it says Windows NT 10.0, obviously because I'm running on Windows, right? Now let's take this to Linux. To get this running on Linux, I probably can attach this debugger directly to WSL, but I really want to show you from the command prompt. So I'll start my Linux environment over here. So this is Ubuntu. So this is beauty of Windows Terminal. I can make these prompts pretty with all these things. Okay, I have a question. I think, is Blazor a replacement of Angular from MS? No, it's not a replacement. You do have Angular and React. But if you're a .NET developer who do not want to make use of Angular and React and go into multiple maintenance mode with different programming languages, you can just run everything on .NET because you get the same performance too. Okay, let me go back to the directory where I created. I don't remember these directories most often. Okay, so I am. So you see this thing, this master, these things. These are basically my Git status that is showing that I have modified a few files. So these are part of my Git repository. So this is really cool. Hello Linux. There you go. So I think I'm in the right directory. Okay, let me do a .NET run here. Before I do that, I want to make sure that I have not attached anything because it's going to use the same port. So I just moved into that directory, and I'm just making a .NET run there. Okay, let's see what happens now. So it's going to give me this same browser, same IP address. So I'll just open the same browser. And I'm going to run this in a different page. This is to show you the difference. So there you go. So it's running on Unix 4.4. And this one earlier, which I executed from the Windows environment, that's running on Windows 10. So which is pretty cool, right? So if you want to quickly test on Linux how these things work, you can do that using WSL. Now let's take this one up with this is I want to Dockerize this. So if I want to make this give a Docker support to this, and I can all that I need to do is in Visual Studio, I just say Control-Shift-P, and there you go. So it says add Docker files to this workspace. So let me show you the Solution Explorer and then do this. So when I do this add Docker files to workspace, what it's going to do is it's going to ask me like, hey, what Docker support do you need? So I'll say that's my ASP.NET Core application. So I can choose between many. But because I'm working on .NET application, I'll choose the Linux, so .NET 1. And the next thing it's asked me is like, do you want which operating system? So right here, I can decide where my .NET needs to run. So I'll say I want to run this on Linux. Do I need a Docker Compose file? I don't need, because I don't intend to use multiple projects here, or I don't intend to make Docker as kind of an orchestrator or something, right? So I'm just going to say no here. And it'll ask me the ports that I need to run on. That'll just keep it default. That's it. So once I do that, what it's going to do is I'm going to add this Docker file to this project. So which is mentioning which image from which I need to base out of, which is the ASP.NET 3.1. And then so it automatically looked at my project settings. So since I was working on .NET Core 3.1, it actually put in the images which is necessary for me to run it. And I also have this SDK. So right now with this file, what is happening is it's going to take the source code, put it inside the Docker, compile it right inside that, and create this image. So now when this gets pulled, so how do I make this work? So let me go back to the terminal. And so right now I'm in, so usually if I have to start this, I'll just use .NET build. So here I'm going to use something called as Docker build. So this is how I'm going to containerize this application. Are there any questions? Do we need to install an extension? Yeah, there's a Docker extension that you need to install. So that's right here. Go to the extensions. So search for Docker, and the Docker extension that's also shipped from Microsoft. So you can use that. So that's what I'm using here. Okay, so I'm going to build the Docker image right here, and making sure I give a name. So I'll just use it as Hello Linux itself. And that's it. So it's going to do the Docker build. So what this is going to do is it's going to look at the Docker file and image your application, right? So if you're running this for the first time after Docker, it may take a while because it needs to pull this base images like the 3.1. So be aware of that. So now that I have built the Hello Linux image, I can just simply run. So I can just say Docker run. I need to provide a port where I need to run. So I'll just keep the same port, 5000. And then internal Docker internal port is 80. So that's where the HTTP point I need to hit on. And I'll say which image I'm going to run. So this is going to run on it. So don't get confused with this port because this is Docker internal port which it's running on. So I go back to this and let me run this again. I'll tell you the reason why I'm running those things again. Localhost 5000. And there you go. So now it's running on 4.19. So this is what I wanted to show you. Right now, this image is Unix is 4.19. The one WSL that we run is 4.4. And the Linux one, the Docker one is 4.19. And the way this is being picked is basically what image is your base image based off. So this image that we created is based off of that Unix environment, and that's why that is different. So if you want specifically to test on those images, you can specify those and test that separately. So that's Linux version for you, which is pretty cool. Okay, so let's go back to Visual Studio. And let me see what else I need to cover. Oh, yeah, single file exe. Let's talk about single file exe. Now, when you build applications like microservices, we want the exe to be really small, as well as you want to make it single file so that it's easier. Now, with Docker, it's very easy because you're imaging it and all the configurations, all the necessary things that is needed is going to be packaged into a single image. But there are situations where you want to have a single file where it's just a worker that you need to run on this particular environment without Docker, maybe, right? Or maybe it's a Windows applications where you want to give it to a friend. Earlier, what used to happen is, if you have a particular .NET application, even if you compile and send it to a friend of yours, they need to run the appropriate framework in order to run it successfully. And that was always a challenge. So we made this understanding, we understood this and we made this thing simple. So I'm going to show you a simple demo using console application, how to do single exe based applications. So I just created a file new project. Now this is nothing but a simple hello world that it's going to emit. Let's make this a single file exe. So I'll explain everything, every step by step. I'll explain you what exactly happens behind the scene. So I'm going to say right click publish. And I'm going to choose a folder. So this is what you need to do if you want a single exe. So this is basically creating a published profile. So I just say finish. And now in the edit, I'm just go and I'll explain this here to you. So here we go. So I'm choosing between debug and release versions. And then I'm choosing a .NET target framework. And the reason I'm not seeing .NET 5 here is because current Visual Studio does not support the preview. So if you want the preview support, you can use the preview version of Visual Studio. Now, the other thing is it says deployment mode. Do you want framework dependent or do you want self-contained? The difference is earlier, when you say framework dependent, so it needs a framework that is externally it is depending on. You can make it self-contained if you want the .NET runtime to run within your app. And that's what is going to make it easy to ship between systems, right? So when you make it self-contained, that means you're attaching the .NET runtime, including its base ELs and JITs and JITs and other things. So you also need to specify what is the target runtime. So this is something that you need to be very careful with. So you need to be absolutely sure where it's going to run. So in my case, I'm going to run on Windows x64. So if you know that you're going to run this on Linux, at some point you have to choose Linux x64. Or if you're running on Mac OS, you can run it on OS x64, right? So you need to select that. Once you select that, there are other options that you can select, which is you can say produce single file. Now, single file, this is what I was talking about. The single file exe is kind of packaging everything into a single exe. So it just runs, it's like a bundle. So it just runs out. It doesn't require any installations and other things, and it can be shipped easily. Now, the other thing is Enable ready to run compilation. Well, this is if you want AOT, ahead of time compilation, enabled, right? So you know that .NET runs using just in time and other things. So if you do not want, so just in time, what it does is it actually recompiles in the runtime and converts into the native binaries. So if you don't want those things and you want ahead of time compilation, you can enable this. I'll leave that for now. And there's another thing that says trim unused assemblies. Now, so the thing that you need to remember is when you attach a particular runtime into your application, it also attaches a lot of other things that is needed for it to run, right? Now, you can use this feature called trim unused assemblies to, what it does is it goes through, it goes through your code and tries to understand which are the things that you use within the runtime, which are the things that is needed for you to run, and it removes the rest of the thing, okay? So that way, it makes sure that your applications work seamlessly, and at the same time your application is not large and it's not bloated enough. So I'm going to save this right now and click on publish. Okay, I have a question. Visual Studio does not work on Ubuntu. You mean yeah, okay, I think I see Swami responding. Yes, you don't have a VS version within Ubuntu, Visual Studio specifically. It's on Mac and Windows. But yeah, you can use VS Code for that matter. Okay, did I click publish already? I think I did, right? Let me go and see. So I'll just open this file explorer. If you go to the bin, release, Netcore app, and if I go to the publish folder, now you can see that this is the application that you need. You can send it to everyone, and it is only 25 MB. So if I chose that, hey, don't trim it, it probably is going to take more spaces. And if you're not using .NET 5 for now, and if you run this code yourself, probably it's going to be higher than this. And what we are doing right now with every release of .NET 5, we are actually improving this, because there's a lot of things that needs to be taken care of, because you have runtime reflections and other things that people may use it, and those things won't work really well if we just if the code can't understand which are the things that you're referencing in during the compile time, it is going to omit it, right? So we have to take care of a lot more things like that to make sure your application work. So in .NET 5, we have improved this whole size reductions and other things. Okay, cool. That's with single file. Okay, now let me come back to something called as Project Tie, which is very exciting for me. So let me just close this code. Let me get back to Visual Studio. Sorry, let's go to terminal. So I have this project called microservices. No questions? Okay. So I have this project called microservices. So let me open this. So I have this code. I have this backend project and a front-end project, right? Generally, what you would see in a microservice environment is like you'll have multiple projects running, and if you want to run this on your local machine to run and test them all, what you're going to do is you're probably going to do this. There are many ways to do that, but let me show you this. So if I go into this backend, so this is where I'm going to start. So I'm going to say, let me see, this is correct. Yeah. So I'm going to say .NET run. So this is going to run my backend. So now I'm going to copy this. Okay, this is my project that is running on the backend. I'm going to copy this and put it in my front end so that my front end also works, right? So I did that already. So I'll go to my front end. So right now, and then I'll just say .NET run. Right. So now it's going to run on 5903. So let me copy that and open my browser. And let's close these things and go to this 5903. So there you go. So basically, this is a simple web application that is connecting to a backend, and backend service is basically giving some weather data, and the front end is actually, putting that web data in. So if I refresh the screen, it's just a random data that's coming every time you hit it, right? Now look at this process that I took to kind of like connect to like both the services. Like, so in reality, you probably have more services than this, right? So you have to run all these services together and just make it work. Now, if you are like me, if you're working with Dockers and other things, you probably can do that with Docker Compose Up. And what that is going to do is it's going to create images for every single thing, and you need to have really high-performing machines to make these things work for you. Now, what we did is we thought like there is an opportunity for us here to make this experience better. So what we did is we built a tool called Tye. So what Tye does is I just have to go and say, okay, Tye run in the main folder where you have these projects, which is linked through the solution. So now here I'm going to say Tye.run. So it's going to look at all the projects, and it is going to host it for you. And that's the beauty of it. And not only it's going to host it for you, it's also going to give you this dashboard. So if I go into this dashboard here, see that? It automatically gives you this front end and back end project that is running on, and you see this port. It's no more the 5901, 5902, but it randomly figures the port that's free in your system, and it is going to apply that. And at the same time, you can also see what's the logs of it. Like, let's say if I want to go and watch this front end, I'm going to hit on it. Now, that's going to fail. I want to know what exactly went wrong. I can go into the logs to figure out, hey, it's trying to look at 5901 port, and that's no more the port in which I'm hosting that, right? Because the Tye actually figured this port for you, and then it hosted it itself. So to make that simple, that's called the service discovery. We can go fix that. Now, how do you fix that? Is go to the backend and probably go like whatever port the Tye is doing it. You can actually hard code it, but that's not the right way to do it, right? Especially in the cloud native world when configurations keep changing. So you need to make it more configurable. So for that, I go into my front end, into the startup.cs. Now, this is my hard-coded backend. So I'm going to come in that, and I'm going to uncomment this thing, which is a configuration.get service URI. And this method, this is an extension method on configuration, and this comes from this particular project file, which is package manager, which is Microsoft Tye.extensions.configuration. So make sure to include that, otherwise you will not see that particular thing. So now what it does is whatever name you provide as your service name in Tye, it's going to look at what is the port that is configured, and it is going to give you that port, the host directly, which is host:/port. Right? That's it. I can go back to my Tye and say Tye run. So now if I go back to the dashboard, and if I hit it, so I'm back. Now it's all working very fine, right? So if I just refresh it, now it's going and hitting refresh. Now let's take this one step further, right? In reality, you don't want to refresh things like this. You may want to add something like a cache, right? Cache is something which is very much used in all the microservices development, because you don't want to keep hitting the APIs or the endpoints very often. Instead, if there are situations where you can cache it so that you can deliver things faster for your clients. So the other thing that you probably do is you will use something like a distributed cache. You can't have in-memory cache, because even if you have in-memory cache, the challenge with that is like you can have multiple replicas of the same services. So if you have multiple replicas of it, in-memory cache is going to work only on one of the replicas, not on the other, right? So you will implement something called as a distributed cache, and most often people use something like Redis. So let's go and implement Redis, right? So let's to implement Redis. Before I do that, I need to tell Tye some configuration that where and how to fetch Redis. So for that, to start with, I'm going to say Tye.init. Okay, what this is going to do is, again, before I execute this, I'll just keep these things smaller. We'll say Tye.init, and you can see what it's going to create. It's going to create this YAML file. It's very similar to the YAMLs that you would have probably seen with Kubernetes and other things. So it now explicitly says front-end project, back-end projects, which Tye was doing it anyway. But now you can explicitly write these things. So if you want to change the names of it and other things, you can configure it. But what I'm going to do right now is basically going to add some code for my Redis cache, right? So what I type in, so I have Redis, and look at this. It says image. It says image Redis, which means now I don't have Redis installed in my system. So I'm asking Ty to go figure this image and bring that down for me, right? And the way it needs to connect is I specifically say connection string, which is host : port. The port that I bind to is 6379. Usually Redis is bound to that port. And I say this is how I need my applications need to connect to this. So I explicitly write this. Now let's go and run this. Let's see what happens now. So if I just say Ty run, so you can see that as I'm running, it's actually creating containers, right? So for this to work, please be aware that you need Docker running. So I have Docker running on my system. So that's why it just went and pulls up everything. So now if I just go to this port, sorry, to this dashboard, just refresh this, you can see that now I have containers also running here, right? Redis and Redis CLI. So it's open and connected to the port. Now, if I configure my project to work with this particular host, I'll be able to easily implement this, right? Implement cache. So let me go and do that now. I'll stop that. And right now, just for simplicity, I'm actually implementing this in the backend. You can decide where exactly you need to implement. Sometimes you can implement in the gateway or elsewhere where it makes more sense, right? So I'm going to stop this particular code, which is actually sending me these random values all the time. And instead of that, I'm going to use a new code, which is basically randomizing for the first time and also putting it into the cache, right? And this also has a code which says expire every 5 seconds. So that way I get a new value every 5 seconds. So this is totally configurables. Now, what am I using for this is basically, if I go into my CS proj, I have this Microsoft extension caching.stack exchange Redis. That's what I'm using. That's the NuGet package that you need to use if you want to work with Redis. So use that package. And there's only one more step that I need to do is I want to tell my caching middleware that the cache that I'm going to use is basically the Redis cache. And oops. And the configuration, where exactly, how am I going to connect? So you can use the same Ty configuration and say get connection string, the name, which is Redis. That's all I need to do. So now, so just to be clear with this, I go back to the control and I'll show you. This is the iDistribute cache implementation. This is all baked into .NET. So if you're first time into this, if you're seeing this for the first time, I recommend that go and see the documentation for this. It talks about how do you implement SQL Server cache, how do you implement in-memory cache, or if you want to implement cache with some other database, you can do that. And Redis is very simple. You just need a NuGet package and then add these things in. So now I have enabled my backend to use the cache, right? So now let's go and see Ty run. And if I go back to my browser and refresh this and connect to my front end, now if I just refresh it, see that? It's all cache enabled now. It's not refreshing, so it should refresh after 5 seconds. So after 5 seconds, it just did a refresh. So I'll show you again. I'm doing refresh, refresh, there you go. So I implemented cache within no time. And the other thing is, the most important thing is, like, you as a developer are not spending time figuring this whole thing out. Now, where do I host the Redis cache? Can I use Docker? Do I need to expose this? Should I create the, make everything into Dockerized and then, open a network port for it and then connect with it? None of those things. Ty does everything for you. And this is all preview features, by the way, right? So if you have any good experience working with Docker and you find some situations where you think we can improve this for your development purposes, let us know, and we'll be happy to take those feedback in. Now, if I want to run this like containerized, create containers and run all my projects, all that I need to do is basically, let me see, try run help. Yeah. And I just have to specify Docker. So what that will do is that will containerize everything, all your projects. Right now, it does containerizing because that's how it basically is creating proxies. But if you want to run this as entire Docker images, you can do that too. Now, there are other things with Ty, right? For example, I want to deploy this to Kubernetes, right? So now if I want to start deploying it to Kubernetes, the problem is I need to find Kubernetes, right? So right now I have local Kubernetes running. So if I show you kubectl config context. So I have local Kubernetes running here. So this is Docker desktop. This is the one which comes with the Docker. So I can actually deploy this directly into this Kubernetes. So make sure your Kubernetes config is set correctly to the place where you want to deploy. And the next thing you do is tie deploy. With that command, you can actually run this entire thing and deploy directly into Kubernetes. Now remember, one thing is I did not create containers here. There's no Docker file here. So Ty is doing all this magic for you behind the scenes. Now, when you deploy to the Kubernetes, how does Kubernetes know where the image is, right? And that's why you need something like a container registry. So in my case, I have Docker configured as my container registry here. So that's why all my images are going to be pushed into my Docker Hub. But if you want to explicitly configure something else, you can also in Ty, there is a setting where you can just say register. I don't remember exactly. I think it was registry or container registry or one of it. If you specify it, it'll know that is a registry where it needs to push your images in. And then later in the YAML file, you can specify which image that needs to be pulled in, and that is going to get pulled in, right? So in this case, the only two things that I did is I needed to install Redis separately because even though I mentioned Redis as an image here, Kubernetes will not know that. So I need to explicitly call that out. So I did that. And the second thing is I did tie deploy, and I put interactive. So when I went tie deploy, and I also gave this command or the parameters called interactive. So this will ask me things that I need to be configured if there is no configuration that was found. So in my case, it did not find a container registry configuration. So it asked me, where do you want us to deploy this and or image it, right? So I got that information. So I gave my Docker Hub, and then it got deployed. So that's all I did. And if I execute this command, it's going to take a while. So that's why I'm not doing that. I already did this for ahead of time. So if I go to get pods, you can see that this is running on Kubernetes. I have the same things running. So you have the Redis running on a container, front end running on a container, backend running on a container. I can scale up if I want to. So let's look at how is it in the Kubernetes, right? So I can just say kubectl port forward my service, which is the front end. And I want to port forward again to the 5000, which is easier to remember, nothing else. So now I have port forward the port to 80. So now it's actually, if I go and say 5000, I don't have HTTPS enabled, so I'm just going to remove that. There you go. So now you can see that this is running from Kubernetes. It's not running. OK, hang on there. That's probably the other application, which probably is running. Is this running somewhere? Yeah, there. OK, let's do some other port forward. So I'm hoping I don't have 5300. Yeah, there you go. So there you go. So now this is the application that is running inside Kubernetes. Sounds good? Thank you, Swami, for answering those questions. Ty seems like a virtual assistant bot for developers. Well, it isn't a bot yet, but it definitely does a lot of magic. So one question that we always get is like, how does this magic happen? So it's all open source, so you should give those things a try. So I'll finish off some of the other things, and then I'll go into the questions. So talking about cross-platform native apps, so there's a number of things I told you. OK, let me talk about these free ebooks a bit. So if you go to BDotNet/architecture, this is where you get all the free ebooks. So the Blazor app is right now in preview, so I'm working with the authors to get this out very soon. But you have architecting cloud native apps and the microservices one right here. So if you go inside, there's this microservice one. So if this is for people who are starting with microservices, right? So if you want to know how do you design with CQRS and Saga patterns and DDD, domain-driven design. So this book covers a lot of things. And we also have the cloud native book, which is basically talking about like, okay, how do I do this on the cloud? Like, what do I choose? What is important for me in the cloud, right? So choosing Kubernetes, okay, now what's next, right? Probably Redis cache, or how do you do logging and monitoring? Or if you want to handle resiliency in a service mesh, right? So which service mesh to go for? So we have covered those kind of aspects into these books, so you should check them out. So as always, I'm always looking for feedbacks, so you should help me out wherever you can with your feedback, the things that you work with your customer and you think that it's going to benefit to everyone else. You should let us know. And this is all available as docs. So if you find something interesting out here and it's like, hey, I know this, I know how to do this, or maybe there's a typo or there's something else that you need to fix, you can directly click on edit here, and which will take you to the GitHub page where we're hosting these things, and send us a PR, right? Change that and send us a PR, and then I'll be happy to review them and get this in. Now, one thing that I forgot to show you is if you go to the TIE, this is the page. So there's a thing called introducing Project TIE in .NET Dev Blocks. I'll put this in things in the chat window here. You should try this out. So this is whatever you saw right now with the TIE. This is all written here, how to execute this. So my suggestion is give this a try yourself, so you know exactly how it is working and what are the kind of things that it's solving. So the thing that I did not show you right now is basically creating these deployments, right? So this TIE deploy and how the Redis is being installed. So give it a run because this takes a couple of minutes to do that. That's why I avoided that. But you can try that yourself. It's very straightforward, right? And then the roadmap for us is like implementing Ingress, implementing Dapper, Zipclin, Elastic Stack. So all those necessary things that you would require to run a cloud native application, probably in production. How we are thinking about how can we make sure those things are easily working, deployable locally and working seamlessly for you. So that's the way we look at it. And these are things part of the .NET 5 commitments from our side. Okay, you know how to grab the free ebooks, things that I work on. The other thing is .NET MAUI support. We don't have time to introduce this. I'll talk about this more, but then I encourage you to go give this talk. Go check this talk out. I think it's on .NET MAUI. If you go to YouTube and search for .NET MAUI build, there's some really amazing sessions about how we actually integrated the Xamarin. We're trying to integrate Xamarin into the .NET platform. So you really don't have to really look for Xamarin and other brand names, right? And it also has something called MVU pattern, other than the MVVM pattern you already may be aware of, building Xamarin Forms. So it's basically a natural progression from Xamarin Forms to the MAUI, but it's way different. It makes it way simpler. Okay. So this is in future. It's going to be the evolution is basically from Xamarin Forms. You'll have system.ui, so you don't have to remember namings like that. Xamarin.essentials becomes Xamarin system.devices, and you start with file new MAUI. Same way in CLI.NET new MAUI, so that's very straightforward, easy to remember. And its MAUI is something like more a simple single project instead of having multiple projects, and you can have implementation for iOS and Android within the same specific folders. So that's easy. And also, we are also rebranding a few things with .NET. Probably this is going to come up in .NET 6. So Xamarin iOS will become .NET for iOS, and Xamarin Android will become .NET for Android. So you do .NET new iOS, .NET new Android. So nothing is changing there other than because they are native SDKs of iOS in .NET and Android similarly. So nothing is changing there, except that it's going to be integrated into the .NET, and the way you do things in .NET is going to be exactly the same. All right, .NET 5. So I talked about the project type, talked briefly about the cloud native improvements that we're doing. And there's Project YARP, the reverse proxy. I have the demo here, but then I consider that could be a little complex, especially if you have not worked with Nginx or anything of that sort, then it probably would be a little complex to understand. So there's .NET Preview 6. Go give this a try. So they're all previews. So November is when we plan to release this. Okay, quick question on what about UWP. Well, you may be aware that Windows team actually came up with something called as WinUI. So UWP is not coming to .NET Core. Instead, WinUI is going to be, and it will support .NET 5 and C++. And WinUI is much better because it has no app container, and it works on all Windows 10 versions. So it's very straightforward and fluent API. Okay, simple things to remember. .NET 5 is going to be November 2020. Every even release is going to be the LTS version. So that makes it easy for you to understand. Are you on the LTS version? Are you on the current version? It's very easy to understand. Every alternate release is going to be, or the even number release is going to be an LTS version. So what we're going to see in November 2020 is the .NET 5, and .NET 6 is where we see everything getting integrated. The one vision that we talked about, and we were thinking about .NET 5 and pretty much earlier than that, but due to all the pandemic situation, we prioritized on bugs and other improvements in the .NET rather than improving on the working on the new features. So .NET 6 is where you can actually look at how all these things are going to get integrated into a great single platform vision that we have. The other thing that you probably want to keep a note of it is .NETconf.net. So since we talked about cloud native, let's go to .NETconf.net. I want to tell you something before. So there is a November release, which is all about the .NET Conf, but there is something called as .NET Conf Focus event, which is happening on July 30th. Okay, and we talk a lot about microservices here. So we have some great line of speakers out here. So you'll have more demos on TIE, and also we have some industry veterans talking about cloud native stuff. So save this date and make sure you get on. And this happens a little late in the night for all of us, but it's a pretty exciting event. Okay, I think that's all I had, and I hope I didn't. Yeah, I'm way over time. Have any questions? Thanks, Swami, for answering all the questions out there.
You're welcome, Nish. All right, thank you so much, Nish. That was a very insightful session. A lot of cool things are coming up. Yeah, looking forward to start using them.
Absolutely. So are we on a break now, or?